The Mas, as they were called, were women whose greatest pleasure was in taking care of Maharajji. Once a doctor had said Maharajji should take certain pills at 10 a.m. On this particular morning, the Mas brought the medicine 10 minutes late. Maharajji said fiercely, "If you people don't take better care of me, I'll turn your mind against me," which was the worst threat he could make. I was the station master at Mount Abu, and Maharajji had promised to come there sometime. When I was off duty, it was my policy never to go into the station. But this one day I had been in a long conversation with a friend, and as I left, I wanted somehow to break my policy by cutting through the station in order to save time getting home. Just as I got into the station and was rushing through, the Bombay mail arrived, and there was Maharajji tapping at the window. A number of us Westerners were meditating together at a Buddhist ashram in Bodh Gaya. After a time, some of us were ready to take a break and go on to Delhi, several hundred miles away, to celebrate Shiva's birthday. One of the women in the group, who had come to India overland by charter bus, reported that the bus driver wanted to hang out with us too. So 34 of us left Bodh Gaya and met the bus in Benares and started to drive in Delhi. One of the men in the group, Danny, had left the courses briefly in the middle to visit Allahabad in order to experience a Kumbh Mela. He had returned deeply impressed and bringing us each small meditations depicting the monkey Hanuman, which he had purchased on the Mela grounds. When it turned out that the bus route went right by Allahabad, Danny pressed us to visit the Mela grounds. I protested that the Mela was now over and it would just be an empty piece of riverbank, but he pointed out that it was one of the most sacred spots in India. Some of us were tired, for it was only our first day out in the world after such a sustained meditation practice, and all we really wanted was to get to the Dharmashala where we planned to stay overnight. The thought of even driving the few miles out of our way to get to the river was not appealing, and yet it was a very holy place. I weighed the merits of the alternatives and finally agreed that we should go to the river for a brief stop to watch the sunset. As we approached and drove down into the Mela grounds, which were now quite deserted, the driver asked where he should park. Danny pointed to a place that he said was near a Hanuman temple and also was the spot where he had purchased the small medallions. As the bus was pulling up to that spot, someone yelled, "There's Maharajji." Sure enough, walking right by the bus with Dada, there he was. We all scrambled off the bus and rushed to his feet. I was having a hysterical crying, laughing fit. I remember kissing his feet in bliss, and at the same moment my mind being aware that the spot of sand on which he was standing smelled strongly of urine. Dada later told us that as the bus came into view, Maharajji had said, "Well, they have come." Maharajji instructed us to follow them, and the bus followed the bicycle rickshaw to Dada's house on the suburban street of this great university city. Within minutes we were given food, and arrangements were made for us to lodge at a nearby estate with another devotee. I was told that since morning the servants had been preparing food under Maharajji's order in anticipation of our coining, but if that were so, which of us thought he was making a decision in the bus about whether to visit the Mela grounds? Apparently All was not as I thought it was. Only Maharaji knew that he remembered whom he did when he did. Apparently, however, it was not all in his hands, for many devotees found that by thinking about him, they drew his attention or even his physical presence. Said Vanma, if the devotion is strong enough, the Guru is drawn by the devotee. A Frenchman was staying in Anandamayi Ma's ashram and asked Mai about this Neem Karoli Baba, wanting his darshan. Said that if he were to remember Maharaji for only 10 minutes, Maharaji could be there. The Frenchman closed his eyes and repeated Neem Karoli Baba, Neem Karoli Baba. And after 10 minutes, unexpectedly, Maharaji came to Ma's ashram. He went over to the Frenchman and asked, "Why are you remembering me? I have come. What do you want?" I was in the habit of arising at around 2 a.m. and sitting up a while in meditation. I told no one of this activity. One morning as I came for darshan, the mass rushed over to me in great glee, all taking at once. What they were telling me was that in the middle of the night, as they were sitting with Maharaji, he had turned to them and said, as referring to me, "Has she just awakened? She is thinking of me very much." One day I came from Snowview to Talital, hoping to see Maharaji. I was wondering how I could find him, since sometimes he stayed in one house, sometimes in another. Just as I passed by the house in which he was staying, someone came out and caught hold of me. Maharaji knew that I was coming and sent this person to intercept me and bring me to him. One Tuesday morning, I planned to visit Maharaji at Kanchi, but a call came for me and I had to go to Nainital for business. I figured I could still take the last bus to Kanchi, but when the time came, I missed the bus. At about 8 p.m., I got a lift to Bhowali, but by that time there was no way to get to Kanchi. I felt some depression and went home. I was thinking in this way when there was a knocking at my door. I told my son to tell whomever it was that I was tired and to ask their name. Just then I heard some shouting, "I am Baba Neem Karoli." This was about 9 p.m. Maharaji told me, "You always bother about this and that. Why are you bothering?" He took his dinner at my home and then got into the jeep and returned to Kanchi. The acting superintendent of police, hearing that he was not going to be confirmed, was very upset and decided to resign. At about 8 p.m. he was with his wife when an orderly came and said, "There is a man outside sitting on the road calling for you." He knew it was Maharaji. Maharaji said to him, "You were crying, you were thinking of resigning. How foolish." An old man who for years worked as a prison guard became extremely ill. At one point, his doctor gave him only 24 hours to live. But the man remembered Maharaji, meditated on him and refused to die. On the third day, Maharaj arrived in the city and went to home of another devotee. He said to him, "There is an old man living near here. He is thinking of me very much and he is very sick. We must visit him." Upon entering the sick man's room, they found him in very grave condition. Maharaji placed his foot near the man's head. The dying man pranamed to Maharaji and then left his body. Maharaji said to the other devotee, "He was remembering me very much." Darshan was given, then finished. The end. I am here and I am in America. Whoever remembers me, I go to. Chaos and confusion. Wherever Maharaji was, there was chaos and confusion. Sometimes two people were sent to do the same task. Other times one was sent to undo what the first was in the process of doing. Maharaji would tell one person one thing and another something opposite. When confronted with such inconsistencies, he would deny all. Such confusion served a number of obvious purposes. First, it veiled his power so that no one could be quite certain what had just happened, and the confusion also allowed each person to hear what he or she needed to hear from among the conflicting bits of information. Such inconsistencies served to loosen the mind of those devotees who with problems of rigid thinking. From another point of view, one could understand the confusion as a reflection of the fact that Maharaji was not just one person. As a mirror, he was the reflection of whomever was thinking upon him, and he was conscious on many places at once. Thus one statement such as "I can do nothing" might be followed moments later by the statement "I hold the keys to the mind. Everyone is my puppet." Appreciating this dimension of Maharaji made one delight in the confusion. Two long-time devotees were told that they would be able to find Maharaji at a certain temple on the banks of the Ganga. They went there immediately and found him. He acted as if he'd never seen them before. "Who are you? Where do you come from? What work do you do? Why have you come here?" he inquired of each of them. They patiently answered him until finally he said, "Sit down." Maharaji was never in bondage to anything. He wouldn't follow suggestion and wouldn't do the unexpected, and would do the unexpected. If I asked to stay longer, for example, he would get up and go. Maharaji would make predictions or say something of personal import in an off-band manner in the middle of political discussion. Often his predictions wouldn't come true. If you wanted a specific prediction from Maharaji, he would often be vague. He'd never give an explanation for his predictions. Anything you can say about him, you can also say the opposite. One time in Vrindavan, Maharaji had called us all over, and I was at the front of the pack as he ran across, entering the room ahead of everyone else. I felt as if I'd caught him unawares. He saw me and got embarrassed. It was as if he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't have, as if he were in the cookie jar. He was looking so guilty, and I was trying to figure out what it was I had caught him doing. Finally, I just gave up. He must have been pulling another of his tricks. Once some devotees were with Maharaji at the Ganga, and they proposed to Maharaji that he bathe there. He protested, but they urged him and finally succeeded in lowering him into the water from their boat. Maharaji at first acted like he was drowning. Then suddenly he began to swim around the boat. Later, in recounting this incident, Maharaji told everyone that they had tried to drown him. Once in the middle of the night at the ashram, we were awakened by shouts and the sounds of footsteps. People were running to and fro and lights were going on all over the place. We stuck our heads out the door to discover that Maharaji was up. He wanted rotis. Then he screamed, "There's a snake in the mother's room." And when they went to check it out, what they found, there was a rope. At Kenchi he had this simple little room, which we used to call his office. There was a window with shutters on the inside that he could open, where he'd often sit, looking out and giving darshan. Sometimes he would jump around in the room like a monkey in a cage or press his face to the bars. At other times, someone would come to the windows to see him, and he'd just slam the shutters closed. He'd start off a conversation saying one thing, and then by the end of the conversation he'd making the opposite point. He once told one Western devotee about smoking dope. He said to him, "You like smoking charas?" Hashish, that's good. Shiva smokes charas. That means you like Shiva. We were all really thrilled to hear this. But then he started to turn it around, saying, what's better that you do smoke charas or eat food? About 5 minutes later, he said, don't smoke. Once he said, oh, it's very nice and peaceful here in Kanchi. When you come here, you can really get peace. Shanti milta hai, peace is found. Then a few weeks later, some trucks went by on the road and he said, oh, this Kanchi, so noisy, no peace here, Ashanti. He'd gone from Shanti to Ashanti, not peaceful in the same place. It was sometimes very hard to figure out what Maharaji was saying. Often he'd repeat the same word about 5 times. One of his favorite things was saying the same thought over and over again, just rewording it different ways, drilling it into your head. If it was something about someone getting married, for example, he'd say, you got married, didn't you? No, you didn't. Did you? You did. He'd gone on like that back and forth. It was the same way he plays with things. He'd pick up something, turn it over, flip it back over, then flip it over again. He'd do the same thing with words. He'd take a sentence and turn it around, and your head with it. One morning, Maharaji greeted his devotees with complaints of a very sore knee. Some devotees took him seriously and they suggested various cures. Others took the complaint lightly and told Maharaji to cure himself since he was the cause of his complaints. Nevertheless, oils and balms and compresses were applied to the area of pain, all to no avail. Maharaji insisted that these remedies wouldn't work, and what was needed was a certain medicine he'd once seen in Dada's home. He called in the Mustache Medicine and told his mustache to indicate it. He said it was the only medicine that would work. All this meant nothing to this devotee who couldn't recall any mustache related medicine in his home. Later in the day, the devotee went to the bazaar to buy supplies for the ashram. While in the pharmacies, he noticed a picture of a mustachioed man on a small box containing Sloan's balm, a heat-producing medicine. He purchased it and gave it to Maharaji. Maharaji shouted, that's it, the mustache medicine, put it on. Moment after, the balm was rubbed onto his knees. Maharaji announced that the pain had vanished and that now he was fine. Janaki and Draupadi were sitting before Maharaji, and Maharaji turned to Janaki and asked, who do I like better, you or Draupadi? Janaki said sweetly, why Maharaji, you love us all the same. Maharaji replied, no, I like Draupadi better, which of course upset her a great deal. She got up and walked out, heading for the Vrindavan Bazaar in order to run away. What kind of guru has preferences? While she was in the bazaar, she realized that she couldn't run away after all. Wanting to do something nice for someone, she bought a little brass murti of Hanuman and returned it to temple and put it in her room. Immediately after, Maharaji caught her and asked her, where have you been? What have you been doing? What did you buy? She told him about the little murti. He told her to bring it to him, and when she did, he handled it a while and looked it over and then told her to give it to me. I don't know if she had meant it for me or if Maharaji initiated that. The very day after I had privately wished for a little Hanuman Murti, I was given this one. I'd be alone with Maharaji in his room, and I'd want everybody to share this experience. So I'd say, Maharaji, they'd really love to come in. He'd say, should I let them in? I'd say, yes, let them in. He'd say, go bring them in. Sometimes he'd say, nahi, you just be here. Or he'd say something about all of them being badmash, rascals. I'd argue with him that they were not all badmash, that some of them were confused just like me. It said that was true. Then add, nahi, they are all badmash. At the time of Big Havan, the fire ceremony, many people said they were going to fast, but after 2 days they ended up not fasting, and all of those who said they weren't going to fast ended up fasting. One day in Allahabad, a Sikh family had arranged to feed all of the satsang at their home and entertain us for the afternoon. I wanted to stay behind with Maharaji, so I went and hid up on the roof where nobody ever went. Everyone was rounded up to leave for the outing, and after they were all gone, I was really afraid. Oh, what's Maharaji going to do when he finds I am still here? I thought. I asked Didi, Dada's wife, what Maharaji would do when he found this out. She said, oh, you better talk to Dada. So I went to Dada. Dada, I don't know what Maharaji going to do, he replied. Who does?